Thank you for inviting me to this amazing conference and talk about how we are using high-performance computing in the energy transition at BP. I'm Samir Khanna. I'm an advisor and senior manager of a small global team that specializes in computational modeling. For example, computational fluid dynamics or finite element structural analysis or general multiphysics modeling. So we are part of a broader corporate group called Innovation and Engineering within BP. So as such, we are responsible for supporting all businesses in BP, which would be our traditional hydrocarbon business that's upstream and downstream, and also our new low-carbon energy businesses, the growth engines, for example, biofuels, wind, hydrogen, and electrification. So now, computational modeling has been around for quite some time, and you can probably argue that in certain areas it's quite mature, and it's a risky thing to say in an academic institution, but for most of the engineering applications, I think single-phase fluid dynamics or structural mechanics, you can say, is matured enough that you might not need high-performance computing. But for a lot of the problems that we encounter at BP, they're quite complex. They involve multiple phases of fluids, multi-scale, and multi-physics. So the technology for modeling such multi-phase, multi-scale, multi-physics problem is far from being mature. A lot of the sub-models and the techniques for solving them are still evolving. And in our experience, high-performance computing is essential for modeling such problems accurately and within the time frame that our businesses expect. So I don't know if this animation will work properly. Oh, yeah, OK. So here I'm just showing a sample of different problems that we have used our own HPC facility at the Westlake campus here in the energy corridor that Keith used to run and now Elizabeth runs. And it's an amazing team that has been supporting us. So I'm just showing a sample of different problems that we've been using HPC for. For example, this is obviously a wind turbine here. This is a separator. It's a pretty big process unit for separating liquids and gases. It's used both in upstream and downstream, and often we encounter issues with that. There's a fluidized catalytic cracking, which is the heart of a refinery. It's another very complex chemical engineering process unit. This is a pigging operation. Pigging normally for single phase is OK, but in multi-phase flows, there could be some challenges. So it just gives you an example of different problems that we've been using HPC for. And this is just a very tiny sample that I could fit on one page. So I will go into a little bit more detail in some of these applications today. But what I want to say is, even though these animations look very cool, there's a lot of hard work and expertise that goes behind this. First of all, you have to have a very good understanding of the scientific phenomena at play. Then you have to make the right engineering judgment to make those equations solvable. You need to develop best practices and, of course, an extensive validation methodology for developing your models so that we can use them confidently for our business applications. And finally, you, of course, need a very good HPC facility and an amazing support team that we fortunately have at BP. So that sort of gives you an idea of at least how we are using, hopefully, the high-performance computing across BP. So broadly speaking, we can put all our activities together into this tabular format. So essentially, we have 5 different businesses right now. Our legacy oil and gas resilient hydrocarbons business. We are growing very fast in the bioenergy space, the hydrogen, electrification, and renewables. And then within that, you can put our projects into 2 different buckets. The first one we call the tech service type projects. These are very reactive, short-term projects where our production and operations come to us with some issue. And the issue could be something to do with safety, reliability, or some compliance. It could be some troubleshooting, some equipment is not behaving as expected. We want to understand a little bit more and maybe fix some issue. Or if they want to make some change in their operation just to increase the production rate or throughput or lower their CapEx or make some changes, they want some assurance and guidance for that. So, but these are very short-term reactive sort of projects that we get. But we also, the second bucket is a little bit longer term, a little bit proactive, what we call technology development, where we are really using this high performance computing for rapid innovation, development, and commercialization of new technologies, not only for our resilient hydrocarbons, but also for all these growth engines that we have now. For example, in bioenergy, there are two big steps, are gasification and a Fischer-Tropsch reactor. So we have projects going on to sort of optimize the design and better understand the operation of these units at a production scale. I will talk a little bit about hydrogen modeling that we are doing for electrolysis. So there are a lot of issues, of course, in hydrogen with manufacturing, with transport, with storage. We are doing quite a bit of work in EVs in developing dielectric thermal management fluids. Again, a lot of modeling goes there, not only in developing the right physical properties, but also designing how to optimize the thermal management of different applications. And then finally, I'm going to talk a little bit more about today is the work that we are doing in the renewable space, especially for offshore wind. So we're doing a lot of work there for wind resource assessment, wind farm optimization, or reliability assessment of offshore wind farms. So today I will talk, if I have enough time, about three different applications, one from the wind, one from hydrogen, and one from electrification. So wind, with the fluid dynamics background, of course, wind energy is a very fascinating area for me and my team to work with. But that's not the reason why we're working in this space. This is probably, especially offshore wind, is right now probably the fastest growing business in BP. And although wind energy technology has been around for quite some time, there is still quite a lot we don't fully understand, especially as these turbines are getting bigger, the wind farms are getting larger, and the locations are getting more remote. We don't fully understand how a floating offshore wind turbine would behave, what is the reliability of that in a harsh condition. We don't fully understand its power performance of a floating offshore wind turbine, and how one turbine impacts the other turbine nearby, or how one wind farm impacts the performance of another wind farm that could be nearby, because there's a lot of these wake effects. And understanding all those and wind resource assessment is crucial for making the right investments and designing these designing these wind farms. So, so the first thing that we've been working on is to develop a fully coupled sort of a hydro, aero, structural dynamics model of a floating offshore wind turbine. So why we are doing this is, as I mentioned, first of all, just to understand the reliability of how these wind turbines would behave in harsh conditions. We want to understand how the performance of these wind turbines will be and how it impacts the performance of another turbine nearby. And that will also help us understand how can we optimally design the layout of such wind farms and also control its operations. So if you look at a floating offshore wind turbine, which this is a cartoon, there are quite a few things going on here. There's, first of all, there's currents, there's waves, there's wind, and these turbines, they are anchored onto the seabed with mooring lines. And then on top of that, this blade might be rotating. So there's a lot of things that are going on here. So to be able to model something like this, we first basically broke down this into 5 different things that we first need to have a good strategy and practice for how to model that part accurately. So for example, how do we model the waves? Now, realistic waves are not simple sinusoidal waves. I mean, they can be very irregular, very transient, very complex. But fortunately, we have a lot of experience in those offshore structures through our oil and gas business experience. So we have developed some methodologies for modeling waves more realistically. The second is a floating body motion in, again, a wavy environment. So again, this is a very complex structure with mooring lines and how we need to understand the 6 degrees of freedom behavior of something like that in a realistic situation. So again, modeling that numerically, it's not that straightforward. The meshing, the structure and the fluid, there are a lot of stability issues, and so you need to have a good practice for modeling something like that. The third is the aerodynamics of the blade itself, when the blade starts to rotate. So a lot of the engineering models that we use today for such reliability analysis don't account for the rotation of the blade. So you have the structure and they might give you some answer, but as I will show in my next slide, the rotation of the blade can have an impact on what the reliability scenario for such a wind turbine could be. And then, of course, the atmospheric boundary layer itself. I mean, it's another complicated field in itself. It's not just a simple neutral boundary layer that a lot of time people use. It has got its own. It's not just the wind speed. It's also the stability of the boundary layer, whether it's stable, unstable. That has an impact on the overall turbulent structure of the atmospheric boundary layer, and those turbulent eddies have an impact on what the reliability of that offshore structure will be, and also the performance of that be. So again, you have to realistically model the atmospheric boundary layer, and not just in the neutral condition, but different stable or unstable condition as well. And then finally, once you have the whole flow dynamics model, coupling that with your structural analysis, whether it's one-way or two-way coupling, depending on the application. So again, it's a very complex problem, but this is where we are really pushing the HPC to its limit. I mean, this is where even the HPC that we have today is probably not big enough to model something like this accurately, and again, in the time frame that we would be interested in. So this year we spent quite a bit of time on developing such a model, and we actually are at a point where we do have a model that at least gives some results. We haven't done a full extensive validation of this yet, but so we do have essentially a model that takes all the information that we need, the met ocean conditions on wave, current, wind, the floating platform, the mooring line, of the geometry of the blades and everything. And then we are able to predict what the performance of such a floating wind turbine would be. In fact, with everything in it, the rotating blade, the oscillating structure, et cetera. So for validating, we looked for some data, and we could find this one case that was used as a proof of concept by University of Maine. They had published some data on a 15 megawatt turbine for certain wind conditions and wave conditions. And NREL was also involved in this experiment, and NREL had done some modeling, and they had published some results for using their codes on what the pitch and the heave and the surge for such a structure would be. So those lines are what NREL predicted based on, for two different wave conditions. And then these stars are CFD predictions. So we just wanted to make sure, whatever is there out there, we can basically validate and convince ourselves that we are doing an okay job. So, can you use that? No? Okay. Yeah, so this gave us some confidence that we are okay, we are on the right track. And then again, as I was saying, the results that NREL had published, they hadn't accounted for the rotation of the blade. So they had looked at all these only at just a structure that was oscillating in wavy conditions. But we were able to add the rotation of the blade and then see what the performance of such a wind turbine would be. So we can basically look at the thrust and the power output, which is, of course, oscillating in a situation like that, as you would expect. But more importantly, from a reliability analysis point of view, if you look at this orange line so there is something called a response amplifier operator that's used for reliability analysis. So for this orange line is what you would get without putting in the blade rotation or the blade aerodynamics. And that just shows about a 10 meters or so motion. Again, these are very little exaggerated because these wave conditions are a little bit high amplitude. But once you add the blade rotation, what we predict that RO would be much different from what you would get when the blade is not rotating. So it was a big finding for us, and of course this is still a work in progress, but just goes on to show that you do have to account for all the physics properly to get a more realistic solution. So now I have to work with both of these. All right. So this is the other area that we are spending some time on is just the wind resource assessment. So understanding the performance of turbine and how one turbine impacts the other turbine. So again, first, this is a much higher fidelity calculation of just a single turbine here. Again, we use some published data for a 10 megawatt offshore turbine. And we were happy with what we were able to predict there. But then we put 4 turbines in a row, and just to see what the power output of these 4 turbines would be. So as you can see, this is the power output. This is the first turbine, the second, the third, and fourth. And as you can see from these animations too, there's a big impact, the big impact of these wakes on the performance of these turbines behind. So you need to, which is crucial for designing the layout of a wind farm. So this is just all work in progress, and this is where our HPC, we are really actually pushing it to the limit, the resource that at least we have in BP. Any questions so far before I move on to another topic? So the other area that we are working quite a bit on is hydrogen. And again, here there are issues with both manufacturing, transport, storage, but I'll talk mostly about manufacturing here. And again, for hydrogen manufacturing, of course, electrolysis is one of the main technologies used for manufacturing. There are different types of electrolysis, alkaline water electrolysis, proton exchange membrane, solid oxide, or microbial. I'm going to focus just on the alkaline electrolysis here. And again, this is, again, a technology that has been around for quite some time, but we don't fully understand how it behaves at a large scale, especially when this business grows and we want to produce this at a production scale. The costs are very high. Understanding how we can maybe bring the costs down and not only just for the regular performance, but also understanding the reliability of these devices. So again, this is another multi-scale problem. There is stuff happening right at the electrode surface that basically determines the electrokinetics and also what kind of bubbles get formed. And then there are, and then there is things happening at the unit scale, which is like an electrolyzer, which is anywhere from millimeter to meter scale. That's either one cell, or usually a lot of cells are put into a big stack depending on how much hydrogen you want to produce. And then, of course, the whole plant scale, how this electrolyzer will behave with other units that you put together, the separators and things like that. So we are right now focusing just in the middle, and we have some academic collaborations to do the modeling at the molecular scale. So I'll just focus on this part. So if you just look at the electrolyzer itself, it's a very complex multi-physics problem. There is a lot of things going on inside an electrolyzer. First of all, there's electrochemistry right at the electrode surface, which is quite complex. There's a two-phase flow going on as the hydrogen bubbles are getting formed. It's a turbulent flow, especially at large devices. And of course, there's heat transfer also important. So there are all these equations that govern each part of what's going on inside an electrolyzer. And we need to be able to solve them all in a coupled way to be able to really predict the performance of whatever the overall performance of the device. And again, off-the-shelf software usually doesn't do this type of coupling, so we had to customize the software that we use. We had to write our own user-defined functions to basically make this coupling happen. So with that, what it gives you is essentially you can basically look at an electrolyzer and say, given the certain amount of energy that you're putting in, what kind of hydrogen, what's the hydrogen rate you can produce. So essentially, not only that, we can also look at where are you losing that power. So for different things, for example, this is the minimum required by thermodynamics. This is how much you're losing at the anode, the cathode, and how much are you losing inside the overall the cell design that you have. So that gives you the overall how much voltage you're using for a certain production rate for hydrogen, and then you can see how you can maybe optimize the design to reduce your manufacturing costs. All right. So this is, again, in summary, a work in progress. This, we believe, it's a very good model that we have, which couples all the complex physics that's going on inside the electrolyzer, essentially the multi-phase flow, the impact of the bubbles, the design, the type of plate, and the distance between the plate and the separators. So we can evaluate what the performance of not only a lab scale device, but also all the way up to a production unit, how that would perform, and what we can do to sort of reduce the cost of manufacturing hydrogen. Any questions so far here? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, this is quite fascinating. Thank you for this talk. One thing I'm wondering about is that you've mentioned several academic sources, for research in this area, and I'm just wondering if you've tapped into, the chemical engineering and chemical manufacturing like Dow and DuPont, which have been making hydrogen from electrolysis for decades.
So yeah, so you mean collaboration with Dow or DuPont? So we do have some collaborations going on. I am not at the liberty of talking about that. I'm more on the support side, but I can put you in touch with somebody who's running the show in BP in this space. So. All right, so I think it's an exciting field, and again, I don't know what size electrolyzers you have been working with, but I think the BP is trying to go to much bigger than what's commercially available today. They're talking about building even bigger than what is commercially possible today, I think.
They have a huge operation in Freeport just south.
Yeah, maybe we should talk separately, and I can put you in touch with somebody who might be interested in talking to you. All right, the last area that I want to touch with is just we're doing a lot of work in the thermal management fluids for not only EVs, but also data centers. So this is all the work that's being done by Castrol. Castrol is quite a famous brand, and that's wholly owned by BP. So Castrol is well known for making lubricants and engine oils, but now they're moving more into the EV and the data center space. So there's quite a bit of work going on by Castrol in developing fluids, especially immersion, especially in the space of immersion cooling. So we feel that immersion cooling is the way to go, especially for not only for safety concerns, but also for the long-term performance of the batteries and also the data centers. So there's quite a bit of work going on in this space by Castrol, and we are basically just supporting the business. So there's a bit of stuff going on with molecular modeling in coming up with novel fluids for especially dielectric cooling. We are doing quite a bit of work in modeling not only the battery packs, but overall design of how the battery would perform and we have quite a few collaborations there. And then also not only the batteries, but also the drive line and the e-greases. So quite a bit of work going on Castrol, and my team is essentially providing all the modeling support, essentially to develop these immersive cooling fluids for various different applications. So again, yeah, we've done quite a bit of work in immersive cooling just for batteries. And again, this curve here shows what a big advantage you have in immersive cooling in terms of the overall performance of the battery. So if you look at the blue curve there, the temperature spread is very narrow, whereas the traditional cooling plate gives you a very wide temperature range. So this is what is more desirable for the long-term performance of the battery. So if you can cool your battery in this way, it doesn't age as fast as what the traditional approach would be using just a simple coolant. So for battery itself, it's not only just looking at the battery pack, but we have developed quite a few 1D and 3D models just to understand the detailed behavior of the fluid in the overall system. And not only that, but how does that battery how does it behave in different driving conditions? So we are looking at the entire drive cycle of an EV and looking at the performance of that. And we have we're showing that this immersive cooling with the fluids that we have developed, you get a much better overall performance of the battery in different charging, discharging scenarios. So. And finally, this is just my last slide. It just shows that our Castrol on immersion cooling fluids, we've developed quite a range of immersion cooling fluids under the Castrol On brand to meet different challenges for different applications, not only batteries, but also data centers and crypto and other things. And we'll be happy to talk a little bit more about if somebody has any interest in that. So that's essentially all I had to say about the different things that we are using our HPC for. Of course, this is just a few examples that I've picked out of, for what I could today. But I'll be happy to talk about something else if anybody has any interest in that. So thank you.
Are there questions?
Thank you for this very nice talk. For all these use cases, you develop your own software, you use ISV software?
So we use commercial software, but then we have to customize it. Like I was showing for the electrolysis, the commercial software is not able to do all the coupling, so we need to have some in-house expertise to write our own user-defined functions to make that coupling. And sometimes then equations, when you have such complicated equations all being solved together, they are not very stable, they are not easy to solve. Then you need to have a little bit more customization for what type of numerical approach you need. But our base is a commercial code from which we then further write our own user-defined functions to customize.
Thank you, and I have another question. In terms of HPC system you use for that, you share the HPC system with the classical oil and gas simulation, or you have dedicated systems?
So we just have one system. Maybe Elizabeth she can talk about that. But it's the one system that is used for all these applications. But what is the hardware that is good for seismic imaging, for example, is not necessarily good for the type of modeling that we do, right? Because we have very strong coupling, so we need very fast interconnects, we need very efficient message passing and all that. So distributed computing doesn't work for these types of applications. So that's where we work with our HPC team to see what's the right architecture for our applications, and then we sort of a small subset of the overall facility that we have. we modify that to suit our applications. So,
Samir, you answered that very well. We have multiple clusters in our center, and we've configured them mostly for seismic, and the CFD applications tend to be about less than 5% of what we do. So we've got portions of our clusters that are specially designed for CFD applications.
Anything you want to add, Ken? Only that we designed a certain part of it for CFD, and it is still in the same cluster. So if they're not using all their resources, seismic can come over and use it. And we have had times where we bursted from the CFD area into other parts of the cluster, just at smaller scales, but many of them. So.
Any last questions? Donnie?
Do you see your HPC growing or just a competition for resources among all of your energy spaces?
maybe Elizabeth can answer that question, I think.
I'm not a vendor, by the way.
Yeah, I think our management is quite supportive of us if we need to grow. I think if the right app for the right application. So, yeah, I think that's what I was saying. If, we have just started scratching the surface in the wind space. I think as it becomes more and more clear to our business that this is the right way to go, and we need more, we generate a little bit more interest. I think we will probably be knocking on the HPC door. Hey, we need more compute power. We need more clusters. So I think, right.
Donnie asked, is there still an imperative to grow? Is there a business case for that?
Yes, definitely. I mean, we've talked about geophysics before and that, infinite potential to grow in demand. But yeah, we've seen wind applications, we've seen weather, all of that is growing. And it's just getting more and more complicated and more expensive to run computationally. So definitely. Pardon me? We've talked to Castrol about it. We will keep talking to them about it.
So when Castrol found out that I was presenting at this conference, they wanted me to show this slide. So I'm not very well versed with this slide, but let's just put that up there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.